This video should be 10 seconds long. The Sith hated Vader because he was the chosen one. Done. Video over. Except that answer makes it worse, because it means the Sith rejected the single most powerful Force user in recorded history, a man with over 20,000 midi-chlorians, higher than Yoda, higher than anyone the Jedi Order had documented in 10,000 years of record-keeping. They rejected that. So why? And before you ask the obvious question, how can dead Sith hate anyone? Let me address that right now. Clone Wars Season 6, the episode called Sacrifice. Yoda travels to the Sith burial world of Moraband and encounters the specter of Darth Bane, a Sith Lord who died 1,000 years before the Clone Wars even started. In Legends, Exar Kun's spirit haunted the Massassi temples on Yavin IV for 4,000 years before attacking Luke Skywalker's students. Sith spirits don't move on like Jedi ghosts. They bind themselves to locations, transfer consciousness into objects, cling to existence through sheer refusal to let go. Death is a technicality for them. Their judgment persists. So when I say the ancient Sith hated Vader, I mean their standards, codified across millennia, preserved in holocrons, bound to tombs, found him unworthy. And I'm here to argue that judgment condemns them, not him. This isn't another video about how Vader failed the Sith. This is the case for why the Sith failed Vader, why their entire philosophy proved inadequate to contain what he was, why his so-called weaknesses were the only thing powerful enough to fulfill a prophecy that pure Sith doctrine never could. Consider this a trial. I'm the defense attorney for Anakin Skywalker, and the prosecution's target? Darth Sidious, the Jedi Council, every institution that touched this man's life and used him until he had nothing left. Let's begin with the evidence. 41 years before the Battle of Yavin, a boy was born on Tatooine with no father. His mother Shmi couldn't explain the pregnancy. It simply happened. When Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn ran a midi-chlorian analysis on 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker in 32 BBY, he received a result that should have been impossible. Over 20,000. His exact words to Obi-Wan Kenobi were, "Over 20,000. Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midi-chlorian count that high." Let that sink in. The Jedi Order had spent millennia cataloging Force potential across the galaxy. Thousands of years of records. And in all that time, no being had ever registered a number that high. Qui-Gon believed the Force itself had conceived this child, that Anakin existed at the center of a vergence, a focal point where the Force concentrated itself in ways that defied normal understanding. But here's the thing nobody talks about. From the moment Anakin Skywalker entered the world, he was property. He and his mother were slaves, owned first by Gardula the Hutt, then sold to a Toydarian junk dealer named Watto, who put the boy to work repairing machinery in his shop. Anakin spent his formative years with an explosive chip implanted in his body to prevent escape. He watched his mother suffer in bondage while he lacked the power to protect her. The most Force-sensitive being in recorded history started his life as someone else's possession. And that pattern, being owned, being used, being discarded, would define every institution that touched him. When Qui-Gon brought Anakin before the Jedi Council on Coruscant, he expected celebration. Here was the chosen one of prophecy, the being who would bring balance to the Force. The Council's response? Rejection. They sensed fear in the boy, fear for his mother, whom he'd been forced to leave behind in slavery on Tatooine. And rather than recognizing this as the natural response of a 9-year-old child torn from everything he'd ever known, the Council treated it as a disqualifying flaw. Mace Windu, in particular, expressed distrust of Anakin that would persist for the rest of his life. The Council refused training. Think about that. The highest concentration of Force potential ever recorded walks through their door, and they say no. Not because he lacked ability, he had more ability than any of them, but because he loved his mother too much. Only after Qui-Gon Jinn died fighting Darth Maul during the Battle of Naboo did the Council relent. And even then, they did it to honor a dead man's final wish, not because they'd changed their minds. Obi-Wan Kenobi, himself just elevated from Padawan to knight, barely an adult, took Anakin as his apprentice. From the very beginning, Anakin entered the Jedi Order as a concession, a compromise. The Council admitted him through reluctant acceptance, rather than recognition of his potential. And that distrust never went away. For the next decade, Anakin trained under Obi-Wan while living under constant scrutiny from masters who'd never wanted him there. The Jedi doctrine of emotional suppression, don't form attachments, don't love, don't fear loss, proved catastrophically inadequate for a boy whose entire psychological foundation was built on attachment to his mother. The Order demanded Anakin abandon his connections, his emotions, his capacity for love, offering in return only discipline, duty, and the persistent reminder that he was being watched for signs of failure. But here's what the Jedi didn't know. During those same 10 years, someone else was building a relationship with Anakin. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, secretly the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, positioned himself as a mentor and father figure, the one authority figure who seemed to genuinely believe in Anakin's potential without reservation. Every kind word the Chancellor offered was calculated. Every moment of warmth was manufactured to create dependency, to drive a wedge between Anakin and the Jedi, to prepare the ground for eventual exploitation. By the time the Clone Wars began in 22 BBY, Palpatine had spent a decade building the emotional infrastructure of manipulation. The trap was set. Anakin didn't even know he was inside it. Shortly before the Battle of Geonosis, Anakin experienced the event that would permanently damage his psychological stability. He'd been plagued by prophetic visions of his mother Shmi suffering on Tatooine, the same kind of Force visions that the Jedi should have taken seriously, given their supposed expertise in such matters. The Order offered him nothing. No counsel, no permission to investigate, no acknowledgement that his distress might be legitimate. He was expected to meditate his fears away, to trust in the will of the Force, to accept that his love for his mother was itself a flaw requiring correction. Anakin defied orders and returned to Tatooine. He discovered that Shmi had been captured by Tusken Raiders weeks earlier. He tracked her to their camp, found her dying after prolonged torture. She expired in his arms. In the aftermath, Anakin slaughtered the entire Tusken camp, men, women, children. He confessed this massacre not to his Jedi masters, but to Padme Amidala, the former Queen of Naboo, whom he'd been assigned to protect. The Order that claimed to guide Force sensitives toward balance had no mechanism for addressing the crisis growing inside their chosen one. Also in 22 BBY, Anakin secretly married Padme on Naboo, in direct violation of the Jedi Code's prohibition against attachment. This marriage stayed hidden from the Order for 3 years. 3 years during which the galaxy's most powerful Force user carried a secret that would have ended his career, living in constant fear of discovery while fighting a war on the Republic's behalf. And that's exactly what the Clone Wars turned him into, a weapon. The Jedi transformed Anakin from a troubled young man into a military asset. They deployed him as a general commanding clone troopers in a galactic conflict, responsible for countless tactical decisions, required to kill and witness death on a scale no amount of meditation could process. The Order used his unprecedented power to win battles, while providing no support for the psychological cost of wielding that power in endless war. Consider the sheer volume of trauma the Jedi expected Anakin to simply absorb. He led the 501st Legion through campaigns across dozens of worlds. He watched clones under his command die by the thousands. Men he knew by name. Men who trusted him. Men who were themselves slaves to a system that had manufactured them for war. The Republic didn't ask Anakin if he wanted to be a general. They needed his power, so they used it. And the missions themselves? The Citadel, a separatist prison designed to hold Jedi, where Anakin's own master nearly died, and where the mission's intelligence asset, a man carrying vital information, was killed right in front of them. The siege of Christophsis, the defense of Camino, dozens of campaigns that would have broken anyone who allowed themselves to feel the weight of what they were doing. The Jedi solution was always the same. Release your emotions into the Force. Don't feel. Don't attach. Don't grieve. For a man who had already lost his mother, who was secretly married to a woman he would do anything to protect, who had been told his entire life that his capacity for love was a defect, this advice wasn't guidance. It was a slow-motion, psychological collapse waiting to happen. During this period, Anakin took his own Padawan learner, Ahsoka Tano. In 20 BBY, Ahsoka was falsely accused of bombing the Jedi Temple and expelled from the Order without adequate investigation. The Jedi Council, including Mace Windu, prepared to hand her over to the Republic military for trial and potential execution. They stripped her of her status. They turned their backs. When evidence eventually exonerated Ahsoka, the Council offered her the opportunity to return. They framed their failure as a great trial that she had passed. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the invitation to come back and pretend nothing had happened. Ahsoka refused. She left the Order entirely. And Anakin watched. He watched the institution he served discard an innocent person, his own student, without proper process, then refused to acknowledge they'd done anything wrong. This reinforced every suspicion he harbored about the Council's trustworthiness and their willingness to sacrifice individuals for institutional convenience. If they could do this to Ahsoka, what would they do to him when they learned the truth about Padme? The answer, he suspected, was nothing good. Now we come to 19 BBY, the final year, the breaking point. Anakin began experiencing prophetic visions of Padme dying in childbirth, visions terrifyingly similar to those that had preceded his mother's death. The visions that the Jedi had told him to ignore, until they came true in the worst possible way. And he had no one within the Jedi Order he could trust with this information. The prohibition against attachment meant he couldn't even acknowledge his marriage, let alone seek help for visions concerning his pregnant wife. The Council, upon Palpatine's request, placed Anakin on the Council itself as the Chancellor's representative. In the same session, they refused to grant him the rank of Master, an unprecedented insult. Useful enough to sit on the Council, not trusted enough to be treated as an equal. They wanted his presence, but not his status. Then they asked him to spy on Palpatine, the man who'd served as his mentor for 13 years. They didn't explain why. They didn't trust him with their reasoning. They just demanded he betray the one person who'd consistently shown him support, or at least the appearance of it. When Anakin discovered Palpatine was Darth Sidious and reported this to Mace Windu, the Council's response demonstrated their complete failure to trust him. Windu explicitly told Anakin to remain at the temple while the Council confronted the Chancellor. "If what you have told me is true," Windu said, "you will have gained my trust." After 13 years of service, after fighting their war, after losing his mother, his Padawan, his peace of mind to their cause, trust was still conditional, still something Anakin had to earn, still something the Council reserved the right to withhold. Anakin disobeyed. He arrived at Palpatine's office to find Mace Windu preparing to execute the Chancellor without trial, the very kind of extrajudicial action the Jedi claimed to stand against. Sidious exploited the moment perfectly, appearing helpless, promising Anakin the power to save Padme, forcing a choice between the Jedi Code and everything Anakin loved. Anakin intervened against Windu. Sidious killed the Jedi Master. In the aftermath, Anakin pledged himself to Sidious and was christened Darth Vader. He led the assault on the Jedi Temple. He slaughtered Jedi, including younglings. He traveled to Mustafar to eliminate the Separatist leadership. And when Padme followed him there, when he saw Obi-Wan Kenobi aboard her ship and believed she'd betrayed him, Vader force-choked his pregnant wife. Everything collapsed. Padme's injuries would contribute to her death. Obi-Wan dismembered Vader in their duel and left him burning on the volcanic shore, lungs destroyed by fire. And Padme died shortly after, giving birth to twins, Luke and Leia, before losing the will to live. Everything Sidious had promised, the power to save her, was revealed as manipulation. The dark side couldn't save Padme. It had only ever been intended to claim Anakin. So, the Jedi used Anakin Skywalker as a weapon for 13 years, gave him no support for his trauma, distrusted him until the end, and drove him into the arms of the only person who'd consistently offered him validation, who happened to be a Sith Lord engineering his destruction. And the Sith? The Sith were worse. Darth Sidious recovered Vader's burned body from Mustafar and encased him in a life support suit that would sustain him for the next 23 years. Let's talk about that suit in detail, because it tells you everything you need to know about what Sidious actually wanted from his apprentice. The suit employed archaic technology when far more advanced alternatives existed within the Empire. Sidious controlled a galactic civilization with medical technology capable of near miracles, cloning entire armies, extending lifespans, repairing damage that should have been fatal. He could have given Vader a body that minimized his suffering, maximized his mobility, restored something close to what he'd lost. He didn't. The suit caused constant pain. The neural interfaces that connected Vader's ruined nervous system to his prosthetic limbs sent continuous signals of discomfort that could never be fully tuned out. The respiratory system that kept him alive forced a breathing rhythm that was efficient for survival, but made natural movement difficult and exhausting. The synthetic skin that covered his burns itched constantly. A minor torment, but an unending one. Vader existed in perpetual suffering that fed the dark side while preventing comfort or peace. The auditory sensors that replaced his damaged hearing dampened the world around him, filtering sound through electronic processing that stripped out subtlety and nuance. Vader couldn't hear a whisper across a room. He couldn't detect the quiet approach of a potential assassin without relying on the Force. His awareness of the physical world was deliberately compromised. And most critically, most damningly, the suit was extraordinarily vulnerable to Force lightning, the signature weapon of Darth Sidious himself. For a Sith master equipping an apprentice he valued, this vulnerability would be an inexcusable oversight. A single design choice, easily corrected. For a master ensuring his apprentice could never challenge him, it functioned exactly as designed. Every time Vader might consider striking at Sidious, he would remember, one burst of lightning and the suit fails. The respirator stops. The life support collapses. He dies choking in his own armor. The suit wasn't life support. It was a cage. Compare Vader's treatment to Sidious's other apprentices, and the difference becomes obscene. Count Dooku, Darth Tyrannus, served as Sidious's apprentice before Anakin's fall. Dooku was trained extensively in Sith philosophy, given access to knowledge and techniques that elevated his already considerable abilities, treated as a genuine partner in the conspiracy to destroy the Republic. Yes, Sidious planned to discard him eventually. That's the Sith way. But Dooku was allowed to grow into his power. He was given the tools to become genuinely dangerous. Vader received just enough to be useful, nothing more. The Rule of Two, established by Darth Bane, traditionally dictated that the apprentice would eventually challenge and destroy the master. That's how the Sith evolved. That's how power transferred. The apprentice was supposed to surpass the master. That was the entire point of the system. It ensured that each generation of Sith would be stronger than the last, that the Order would continuously refine itself toward ultimate power. Sidious had no intention of honoring this tradition. He didn't want a successor. He wanted a servant. The Rule of Two was, for Sidious, merely a convenient framework for maintaining control. One master, one apprentice, with no rivals to challenge his dominance. But the apprentice's eventual triumph? The natural evolution of Sith power? Sidious considered himself the culmination, the end point. He planned to rule forever through dark side techniques that would extend his life indefinitely, and Vader was simply a tool to make that eternal reign possible. This is why the ancient Sith would have looked at Sidious and seen corruption, not of the light side, but of their own traditions. The Rule of Two demanded growth, demanded challenge, demanded that the apprentice become strong enough to defeat the master or die trying. Sidious twisted this into stagnation. He wanted Vader weak enough to control, strong enough to serve, never permitted to become what he could have been. For 23 years, Darth Vader served as Sidious's enforcer, hunting Jedi, crushing rebellions, terrifying the galaxy. He received enough power to be useful, enough purpose to remain loyal, enough hope to prevent rebellion, but never enough to pose a genuine threat. Sidious kept Vader off balance through psychological manipulation as much as physical limitation. He dangled potential replacements in front of his apprentice constantly. The Inquisitors, other dark side adepts, anyone who might remind Vader that he was expendable. When Luke Skywalker emerged as a threat to the Empire, Sidious used him as another lever of control. "Join me, and we'll overthrow Sidious together," or "Bring your son to me so I can replace you with him." Vader was never allowed to feel secure in his position. This wasn't master and apprentice. This was owner and property. The same relationship Vader had endured as a child on Tatooine, recreated in black armor. And here's the philosophical point that matters. The ancient Sith, the ones whose spirits haunt tombs, whose teachings fill holocrons, whose standards persisted across millennia, they would have looked at Vader and seen failure. His attachment to Padme? A flaw. His love for Luke? A vulnerability. His inability to fully sever his connections? Disqualifying weakness. By their standards, the ideal Sith would be a being of pure ambition, unfettered by love, driven by hatred and the will to dominate. Vader couldn't be that. He tried. For 23 years, he tried to burn away everything soft in himself, to become the monster the dark side demanded. He hunted down his former friends. He tortured prisoners. He killed without mercy. But he couldn't kill the part of himself that remembered what love felt like. And here's what the ancient Sith never understood. Their philosophy was a trap. Not a path to freedom, a more elaborate form of slavery. What did their ideology actually produce across 10,000 years? An endless succession of paranoid masters and resentful apprentices. A cycle of betrayal and murder that advanced power while achieving nothing resembling the freedom the Sith Code promised. Master after master, apprentice after apprentice, each one looking over their shoulder, each one plotting against the others, each one eventually dying by the hand of someone they'd trained, or failing to train anyone strong enough to continue the line. The Sith pursued freedom through power. They achieved only more elaborate prisons. Vader spent 23 years in a body designed to cause pain, enslaved to a master who would never let him grow, denied the basic dignity of choosing his own path. The dark side hadn't liberated him. It had changed the nature of his chains while making them permanent. Now, the redemption. In 4 ABY, Luke Skywalker, Vader's son, whose existence had been concealed from him for 19 years, surrendered himself to Imperial forces on the forest moon of Endor. Luke believed he could redeem his father. He sensed the remnant of Anakin Skywalker within Darth Vader, and he refused to abandon it. Everyone had given up on Anakin. The Jedi who'd trained him, the wife he'd killed, Obi-Wan, who'd left him burning on Mustafar, the galaxy, which saw only a monster in black armor. Luke alone looked at Darth Vader and saw someone worth saving. That meant something. It meant everything. Vader brought Luke before Emperor Palpatine aboard the second Death Star. When Luke refused to join the dark side, Sidious attacked him with Force lightning, torturing him toward death, demanding Vader watch and do nothing. This moment should have confirmed Vader's total submission. The proper Sith response was to watch a threat be eliminated, to accept the Master's authority absolutely, to let his son die. Every lesson Vader had been taught since his fall, every punishment he'd endured, every manipulation Sidious had deployed, all of it pointed toward obedience in this moment. Vader chose differently. He seized Sidious and hurled him down the Death Star's reactor shaft. The Force lightning Sidious released during the fall destroyed Vader's life support systems. The very vulnerability that had been built into his suit from the beginning, finally realized. Mortal damage. In his final moments, Vader asked Luke to remove his mask so he could see his son with his own eyes. Not through sensors, not through filtered audio, with his own eyes, damaged as they were. He died shortly after, and then something happened that should have been impossible. Vader became a Force ghost, a state canonically unavailable to Sith. He appeared alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda on Endor, at peace, transformed. The Chosen One prophecy had specified that a being would destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. For millennia, Jedi imagined their champion defeating the dark side through superior martial prowess and command of the Force, through power. Sith imagined any Chosen One would become the ultimate Darksider, surpassing all who came before. Neither order understood the prophecy's actual mechanism. Vader destroyed the Sith not through superior power, but through love for his son. He wasn't acting as a Sith killing a rival to claim supremacy. He wasn't acting as a Jedi following doctrine. He was acting as a father saving his child from torture and death. The prophecy was fulfilled through attachment, the very thing both Jedi and Sith demanded be purged. This is the vindication. The Jedi rejected attachment because they believed it led to the dark side, and in Anakin's case, it did. But not because attachment is inherently corrupting. Anakin fell because the Jedi gave him no tools to handle his attachments, no support when his loved ones were threatened, no acknowledgement that love might be channeled rather than suppressed. They told him his emotions were dangerous, then left him alone to manage emotions no one had ever taught him to process. The Sith exploited attachment to bind Anakin, then demanded he destroy it to be worthy of their tradition. They used his love for Padme to claim him, then spent 2 decades trying to burn that capacity for love out of him entirely. Both orders built their philosophies on incomplete understandings of what balance actually requires. The ancient Sith, who bound their spirits to tombs, who created holocrons preserving their standards, who continued judging the living across millennia, their judgment condemns them, not Vader. They pursued freedom through power and achieved only more elaborate prisons. They rejected love as weakness, and Vader's love for his son was the only force strong enough to destroy a Sith Lord who had manipulated the entire galaxy for decades. Sidious had foreseen nearly everything. He'd orchestrated a galactic war, destroyed an ancient Jedi Order, built an empire, constructed 2 Death Stars. His plans spanned decades. His manipulations were flawless. He never accounted for a father's love. The ancient Sith built a philosophy that promised transcendence through the dark side. That philosophy produced nothing but dust and echoes. Spirits trapped in tombs. Voices preserved in artifacts growing more irrelevant with each millennium. A legacy of paranoid masters and murdered apprentices stretching back 10,000 years, accomplishing nothing but the perpetuation of suffering. Vader transcended all of it. Not by being the most powerful Sith, though his potential exceeded any in history. He transcended by being something the Sith code could not accommodate, a man who loved his son enough to die for him, who chose connection over conquest, who in his final moment recovered the humanity that decades of manipulation had tried to destroy. The failures belong to the institutions, not the man. The Jedi Order took a traumatized child and demanded he suppress everything that made him human, then acted surprised when his suppressed emotions erupted catastrophically. Darth Sidious took the most powerful Force user in history and deliberately limited him to prevent any challenge, corrupting even the Sith tradition into a mechanism for eternal control. His power was used by others his whole life. Slave as a child. Weapon for the Jedi in the Clone Wars. Attack dog for Sidious for 23 years. Never his own person until the end. Never free until he chose to die. And at the end, when he finally made a choice that was truly his, saving his son, destroying his master, accepting death on his own terms, he accomplished what pure Sith philosophy never could. The ancient Sith didn't hate Vader because he was weak. They hated him because he proved their entire code couldn't contain what he was. Because his weakness, love, attachment, the capacity to care about something other than power, accomplished what their philosophy of domination never managed in 10,000 years of trying. The Chosen One wasn't rejected because he failed the Sith. He was rejected because he was always going to transcend them. Subscribe for more stories like this.